At 3 a.m., I lay sprawled on the hardwood floor, breath catching in my throat. The boards beneath me were cold, sticky, tacky with my own blood. The copper taste coated my tongue, metallic and bitter, every swallow a reminder that something inside me had broken. My left leg bent the wrong way, twisted at an angle that made my stomach lurch the moment I noticed it. Every shallow breath rattled like glass in my chest. The scream that tore through me wasn't planned. It escaped, raw and animal, ripped from my ribs when a boot landed hard against my side. Dexter's voice still thundered through the room, curses bouncing off the walls like ricocheting bullets. Each word seemed louder than the last, slamming down on me harder than his fists ever could. And through it all, through the chaos, the pounding in my ears, the blinding sting behind my eyes, I looked for her. My mother. Vera. She stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest, pale blue robe tied neatly as if she'd just woken from a peaceful sleep. No panic. No rush forward. No defense. Only silence. The only movement was the lazy sway of her slipper tapping against the carpet. "Mom," I rasped, voice breaking into a sob. "Please, please make him stop." But she didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Dexter's chest heaved, his face flushed red, veins bulging as he wiped sweat from his brow like he'd just finished a job that needed doing. He turned and stormed out, brushing past her without a glance. She stepped forward. Her shadow stretched across my face. She leaned down, not to help, not to comfort, just close enough to whisper. That night wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. Let me tell you what happened. There was a time when I believed my mother loved me. I can still remember the small gestures, the way she used to brush the knots out of my hair in the mornings before school, humming a tune I didn't know the name of but always found comforting. Or the way she once yanked me out of danger when a bee landed on my shoulder, her panic so fierce it scared me into tears. I wasn't crying because I was stung, I wasn't. I cried because her fear for me was so raw, so real, I believed no one could ever hurt me as long as she was there. That's why it took me so long to see the change. It didn't happen overnight. It was quiet at first, almost invisible. She started laughing a little harder at Dexter's jokes than she did at mine. She used words like dramatic and sensitive when I told her how I felt. At family dinners, she'd tell stories about my brother's achievements, but when it came to me, she'd mention only the trouble I caused, as if that were all I had to offer. I told myself I was imagining it. That she still loved me, just differently. But little by little, she began to chip away pieces of me. My opinions weren't worth listening to. My feelings weren't valid. My place in her world wasn't secure. The day she chose Dexter over me wasn't a single decision, it was 1,000 small ones. 1,000 sighs, eye rolls, dismissals. And each time, I shrank a little more, trying to fit into the shape she would accept. Mom didn't just fail to protect me. She deleted me long before the bruises showed. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong, I was 16, filling out the application for a full-ride scholarship. For once, I felt hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, I could escape the walls of that house. I asked my mother for my birth certificate. She handed it over without looking up from her coffee. When I scanned the page, my chest tightened. Father, Dexter K. Maddox. Dexter. Not James Harrison, my real dad, the man who had died in a car accident when I was 5. The name was replaced like history could be rewritten with a pen stroke. I stared at her, confused, panicked. This isn't right, I said. Without missing a sip, she replied, I had to update it. For school records. Don't be dramatic. Don't be dramatic. Her favorite phrase. The duct tape she slapped over every truth I tried to speak. Weeks later, I found the envelope. Tucked under fabric scraps in her sewing drawer, sealed, never opened. My acceptance letter. My scholarship, the one I thought I had lost, was sitting there all along, hidden like it was a secret too dangerous to let me know. I remember holding that letter in my shaking hands, walking into the living room. Why would you hide this? My voice cracked. She didn't even glance at me. You couldn't handle college. I saved you from disappointment. Saved me. That's what she called it. But it wasn't salvation, it was sabotage. And when people asked why I hadn't gone away to school, she had an answer ready. She wasn't stable enough. Too much pressure makes her spiral. The way she said it, flat, convincing, made them nod in sympathy, made them believe her. I watched neighbors, teachers, even relatives look at me with pity or suspicion. Like I was fragile. Like I was broken. But I wasn't unstable. I was erased. Piece by piece, lie by lie, until the world only saw me the way she painted me. The sound of his boots still echoes in my head, the dull, heavy thud of rubber and rage meeting bone. The first kick knocked the air from my lungs, left me gasping on the floor like a fish pulled from water. The second drove so hard into my ribs that the scream ripped from me without warning, sharp and jagged, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. I curled into myself, instinctively trying to protect what was left unbroken, but it didn't matter. He paced above me, shouting about money, about how I was nothing but a problem he'd been forced to inherit. His voice cracked with fury, spittle flying with each word, until finally he spat out, "This is what happens when you don't listen." Then another blow, harder than the last. I turned my face toward the doorway, toward her. My mother. She stood there, robe cinched at the waist, arms folded like she was watching a scene she'd seen 100 times before. Her expression never shifted. The only sign of life was the soft tap-tap of her slipper brushing against the carpet, as if she were keeping time with my sobs. "Mom," I choked, blood thick in my mouth. "Please." But she didn't move. Didn't blink. Eventually Dexter's breathing grew heavy, his chest rising and falling like a man who had just finished hard labor. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. For a moment, I thought she was coming to me. She stepped closer, her shadow stretching across my broken body. She bent just slightly, enough for her words to brush my ear. "You should have just signed the loan, Daisy." That was it. No comfort. No defense. Just a reminder of what she really wanted. The edges of my vision blurred, the world tilting sideways until everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, there were bright lights overhead, voices calling out numbers I didn't understand. A paramedic's face hovered above me, asking questions I couldn't answer. I felt the press of straps against my body, the metallic scent of blood mingling with antiseptic. Through the haze, I saw him, Mr. Kellerman, our neighbor, standing at the doorway, lips tight, eyes wide. He didn't say a word. Just watched as they carried me out on the stretcher. The hospital lights were worse, white, blinding, buzzing in a way that made my head pound. I drifted in and out, catching fragments of voices until one sound cut through all the others. The steady click of heels. She appeared at my bedside like nothing had happened, hair neatly brushed, face calm. She didn't touch me. Didn't even sit close enough to reach me. Her voice was flat, practiced, the kind of tone people rehearse when they want to sound composed. "You made things difficult for everyone again." That was all she said. And in that moment, lying there with broken bones and bruises blooming across my body, I finally understood. It wasn't just that she refused to stop him. She had chosen him. Again. And again. And again. The nurse's eyes were soft when she leaned over me, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. Her voice was gentle, careful, as if she already knew the answer but needed to ask anyway. "We can report this if you'd like," she said. "There's support available. You don't have to go back to this." The words floated around me, tempting, almost unbelievable. But my throat tightened, and before I could even think, I shook my head. "No, thank you." The lie came out so smoothly, it scared me. Because I already knew how this story would end. It had happened before. Years earlier, when I was 17, Dexter had grabbed my arm too hard in the garage. His fingers left purple marks, a perfect map of his hand imprinted on my skin. I'd told a school counselor, my voice trembling, finally daring to say the truth out loud. For the first time, I thought someone would step in, that someone would believe me. The next day, my mother stormed into the school office, tears streaming down her face, her voice pitched high with outrage. "She's just trying to ruin my marriage," she told them, hand pressed dramatically to her chest like the wounded victim. "She makes up stories for attention. She's troubled." They believed her. The counselor's eyes shifted when she looked at me after that. No longer sympathetic, just cautious, skeptical. The kind of look that says, maybe she is unstable. By the time we left, my mother had wrapped her arm around me, leading me down the hall with a smile, as if she'd just saved me from embarrassment. That day taught me something I wish I had never learned: the truth doesn't always save you. Sometimes it buries you deeper. So when the nurse gave me the option, I swallowed the words I wanted to scream. I let silence win, the way it always did. But lying there, ribs wrapped in gauze, leg pinned in plaster, the weight of silence pressed heavier than the cast itself. Because silence wasn't protection. It was a coffin. And I knew, if I went home quiet again, pretending, shrinking, erasing, one day I wouldn't walk out at all. It was nearly dawn by the time they discharged me, my leg bound tight in plaster, my ribs wrapped like fragile glass. The cab ride home was silent, the city still half asleep, and for the first time, I didn't dread the emptiness waiting for me inside my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table, the same second-hand one I'd bought at a moving sale. Its legs wobbled if you leaned too hard, but I'd always liked its imperfection. It reminded me of myself. The blinds were half open, letting in pale stripes of morning light that caught the dust floating in the air, turning it into something almost beautiful. My phone buzzed on the table. Her name. Vera. My mother. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then, without a second thought, I scrolled down, pressed delete, and watched the letters of her name vanish from my contacts. It was such a small act, just a swipe, but it felt like the heaviest chain snapping off my neck. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I poured cereal into a bowl, the cast on my leg propped awkwardly on a chair. The cardboard tore unevenly, spilling a few pieces onto the counter and rolling onto the floor where I couldn't reach them. I stared at them for a long moment, realizing I didn't need to pick them up. Not everything broken had to be fixed right away. Sometimes survival was just eating what stayed in the bowl. Later, I scrolled through old photos on my phone, half out of habit, half searching for something I wasn't sure existed. One picture stopped me cold: a family vacation to Florida. Disney World. I was 14, standing at the edge of the frame, half cut out by my mother's arm as she clung tightly to Dexter and my brother, their smiles wide, hers beaming. Me? Cropped, as if I'd wandered into a stranger's photo by mistake. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just left me out of moments, she'd erased me from the story altogether. I used to think forgetting was mercy. That maybe the mind blurred certain memories because they were too heavy to carry. But I was wrong. Forgetting wasn't mercy. It was theft, and my mother was the thief. I found the proof one afternoon, long before the night on the living room floor. I had been searching for a pair of scissors in her sewing room, the one she always claimed was off limits. I opened a drawer, rifling past tangled threads and scraps of fabric, and there it was, an envelope, still sealed, my name written neatly across the front. My hand shook as I tore it open. Congratulations. You've been awarded a full academic scholarship. Terms enclosed. Deadlines firm. I reread the letter so many times the words blurred. All I could think about was the empty mailbox I'd checked for weeks, the hope I'd buried when nothing arrived. It had been here all along. She had taken it from me. I confronted her, letter clutched in my trembling hands. Why would you hide this from me? She didn't even look up from the laundry she was folding. Her voice was calm, casual, rehearsed. You couldn't handle college. I saved you from disappointment. Saved me. That was her word. Like locking me in a cage was protection. Like clipping my wings was kindness. That was when it finally sank in. My mother didn't lose control, she was the control. Every stolen opportunity, every erased truth, every careful edit of my story was by design. That night, I pulled out a notebook, not a diary, but a dossier. Page by page, I began listing it all: the altered birth certificate with Dexter's name where my father's should have been, the scholarship letter buried in a drawer, the words she used to cut me down in public: dramatic, unstable, troubled. I didn't censor. I didn't excuse. I documented. Because the truth was fragile in her hands, rewritten until I barely recognized it. But in mine, it could finally harden into something undeniable. As I closed the notebook that night, one sentence pulsed in my head like a heartbeat. She doesn't lose control. She is the control. And for the first time, I started to wonder what would happen if I took that control back. The first message came late at night, when the apartment was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed against the table, lighting up with a name I hadn't seen in years. We had been inseparable in middle school, matching bracelets, whispered secrets, the kind of friendship that felt unbreakable. Until one day, my mother told me she was a bad influence and cut her out of my life like trimming a loose thread. The message was simple. I heard what happened. I believe you. My chest tightened, tears stinging my eyes before I could stop them. It wasn't pity. It wasn't doubt. Just belief. Something I hadn't felt from anyone in years. I typed back with trembling fingers, "Thank you. I think it's time someone knows the whole story." It didn't stop there. Weeks later, another knock at my door. My old English teacher, Ms. Thomason, stood in the hallway, clutching a paper bag like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands. She confessed through tight lips that years ago, my mother had written her an email. Said I was emotionally unstable, that I shouldn't be placed in leadership roles, class president, yearbook editor, even the poetry team. She made it sound like she was protecting you, my teacher admitted, eyes heavy with regret. But I see now, it was sabotage. I listened, quiet, nodding. It wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. That night, I added it all to the board on my wall. The hidden scholarship letter. The altered birth certificate. Now, the teacher's testimony. Piece by piece, red string connecting years of carefully orchestrated erasure. I stepped back and looked at the chaos, and for the first time, it didn't feel like I was unraveling. I was remembering. Filing the paperwork felt surreal, my hands trembling as I signed the forms for a restraining order and a case for emotional damages. Every line of text on those documents was heavy with years of silence finally breaking open. My lawyer, a calm woman named Harris, reminded me, the truth matters more when you can prove it. And I could. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Dara sat across from me, perfectly pressed blouse, hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were attending Sunday service. Dexter wasn't there, the charges against him were still pending. Today was about her. Her attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor, this young woman is emotional. Impressionable. She's weaving stories to punish her mother." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, a mirror of Vera's own brand of control. For a moment, my chest tightened. The old fear stirred, what if they believed him, the way everyone always had? Then I slid the binder across the table. Inside was everything. The scholarship letter, postmarked and unopened, pulled from the drawer. The birth certificate altered to erase my father. Printed emails to teachers and counselors labeling me unstable and dramatic. Testimonies from Juno and Ms. Thomason, stapled and signed. I stood, my cast making the movement awkward but certain. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. She didn't just fail to protect me. She erased me, piece by piece, and built a story where I didn't exist. And then, the moment I had saved for last. From my bag, I pulled a small velvet box, worn at the edges. Inside was a silver bracelet, engraved with my initials and the date of my birth. A gift from my real father, something my mother had always claimed was hers. She told me she bought this, I said, holding it up so the light caught it. But the engraving matches his handwriting. I had it verified. For the first time, I saw something crack in her face. Not rage. Not denial. Just the recognition that the performance was over. The judge leaned forward, brows knit. The evidence is compelling. The restraining order is granted. Liability is assigned. His gavel struck wood, final and sharp, like a door slamming shut. It wasn't all the justice I had dreamed of. But it was the first real protection I had ever been given. And for once, it didn't come from silence. It came from speaking. The judgment didn't just end in the courtroom, it bled outward, touching every corner of the life Vera had built on lies. Within weeks, Dexter's business partner severed ties. "Can't afford the scandal," was all the newspaper clipping said, but I could almost hear the bitterness in his voice. The empire he had tried to build, gone, just like that. Vera lost her job too. HR used careful words like unprofessional conduct and breach of trust, but I knew what they meant. They'd read the reports, the testimonies, the truth she'd fought so hard to bury. Her polished mask of control was useless now. Then came the message I never expected. A text from my brother, short, unadorned, glowing on my phone screen late one night. "I believe you." For years, he had stood on her side of the line. That one sentence was the first time he had crossed toward mine. And soon, the letters began arriving. From neighbors. From women in town. Even from an old coworker of hers. Stories spilling out, different details, same pattern. Manipulation. Erasure. Quiet cruelty behind closed doors. My mother wasn't just my monster. She had been theirs too. I sat at my kitchen table, cast still itching around my leg, binder of evidence pushed aside. A small stack of letters sat before me, each one a spark. And I realized something I had never understood before. The truth doesn't stay small. Once spoken, it spreads, like wildfire, like dawn breaking, like oxygen finally rushing into a suffocating room. For so long I had thought silence kept me safe. But now I saw it clearly, silence had been her weapon. And my voice, fragile as it once felt, had become the fire that took her power away. I used to think survival meant staying quiet, small, invisible. But survival is louder than I ever imagined. Months after the ruling, I rented a small community center room with folding chairs and stale coffee. On the wall, I taped a banner I had scrawled by hand. "Family isn't always blood." It started with just a handful of us, women with wary eyes, old wounds tucked beneath long sleeves, voices trembling as they began to speak. Stories of being erased, silenced, rewritten. Stories I knew in my bones. And one by one, as each woman spoke, the air shifted. We weren't alone anymore. Then she came. A girl no older than 16, hair tucked under a hoodie, eyes darting like a bird that didn't trust the cage was open. She barely spoke all night, only listening. But as we were packing up, she pulled up my sleeve, her voice so soft I almost didn't catch it. "I still live with her," she whispered. The room seemed to freeze around us. I saw myself in her, the same tremble, the same fear of not being believed. My hand went to the necklace at my throat, a simple silver chain I had worn through every hearing, every hospital night, every trembling step toward freedom. I unclasped it and placed it gently in her palm. "Keep this," I told her. "It doesn't fix everything. But it reminds you, you survived this, too." Her fingers curled tight around it, like a lifeline. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a bridge. A fire passed hand to hand. The erasure was over. This was legacy. In my journal, I wrote the words that had taken me years to admit. "Mom never hit me. She just deleted me. But I'm redrawing the outline." I closed the notebook and folded a piece of paper, crease by crease, until it became a crane. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but mine. I carried it to the riverbank, let the current take it, and watched it float away, carrying the weight of all the years she had tried to erase. Then I turned to the lens, to you. If your own family ever made you feel invisible, hear me, silence doesn't protect you. Silence is their shield. Truth, your truth, is the thing that shatters it. I know speaking up feels impossible. I know the fear of not being believed, of being called dramatic, unstable, broken. But survival is never about perfection. It's about refusing to disappear. So I ask you, what would you do if your own mother stood by while you were broken? Tell me. Share your story in the comments. Let this space be where silence ends. And if you've made it this far, subscribe. Not for me, for yourself. Because the more we share these truths, the less power they have to erase us. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is here, right now, in the act of speaking and being heard.